Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you. I was just appreciating our biodiversity in the form of this bird over here. Yes, I appreciate Akim, you setting out the big framework. I'm going to be very brief, and I thought I would just touch briefly on three somewhat unrelated points. The first is about the role of the World Bank and how it is really stepping up in terms of its commitment to climate change. Most of you know that we've committed that 28% of all of our lending will go for climate-related activities, be they mitigation or adaptation. But in April, we actually took to the board a climate action plan that has committed us to building climate considerations into every single thing we do, thinking how to be as low carbon as possible and as resilient as possible. And we laid out a whole number of stretch goals in really high impact areas that have just been mentioned earlier: renewable energy, energy efficiency, disaster preparedness, resilience, and really committing to helping all of our clients shape their national policies, their national development plans, their budgets, their investment programs. And we also committed to trying to leverage a lot more private financing into the process. So some of the specific targets, we committed to supporting the addition of 30 gigawatts to the world's renewable energy capacity, and that's a doubling of our current contribution to that process, and mobilizing some $25 billion of commercial funding for clean energy. We've committed to helping develop climate-smart agriculture investment plans in at least 40 countries, putting together early warning systems for natural disasters that would cover at least 100 million people in 15 countries, supporting sustainable forest management plans, strategies in more than 50 countries. And so we've really laid out in these key areas how we want to have additional ambition. So you heard a lot about Marrakesh. The World Bank Group was pretty much everywhere in Marrakesh, working on areas like oceans, resilient landscapes, solar energy, sustainable transport, climate finance, youth engagement. And in each of these areas, we were sharing knowledge and talking about programs that we put in place to really move the agenda from the commitments to implementation. We joined a number of coalitions and initiatives working with our partners. You heard reference to the Ndc Partnership. This is something put together with the Germans and the World Resources Institute to help countries who have made these nationally determined commitments as part of the Paris Agreement actually think about how they do them. How do they prioritize? How do they get the biggest carbon bang for their buck? What do they do next? What do these plans look like? So we are putting together a coalition to help them on that. We announced our climate action plan for the Middle East and North Africa, which will lead to a doubling of financing for climate-related activities to about $1.5 billion a year, focused mostly on issues related to water and food security. And then many of you will know that we announced an Africa climate business plan in Paris, which aims to mobilize some $19 billion. And we talked about the progress we've already made, getting $3 billion put together. So the World Bank has found that it can play an important role both on the knowledge and on the investment front, and that this has become part and parcel of our development agenda. The second point I wanted to touch on, and both the President but mostly Akim mentioned the role of the legal community. The Paris Agreement sets, of course, the framework, but the bank, the World Bank, and its legal vice presidency has really played a critical role since the beginning of the climate negotiations. In the early 90s, the bank's vice presidency drafted a number of the key foundational legal instruments that have been critical for getting us to where we are and where we want to be on climate. They negotiated the bank's founding role on the Global Environment Facility and helped craft its charter, supported the development of the key establishment instruments for the climate investment funds, the master agreement for the Green Climate Fund, and many of you know our Chief Counsel for Environment and International Law, Charles DeLeva, I'm going to assume he's out there somewhere, who has been at the center of many of these efforts. And since he's retiring soon, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Charles. Where is he? He has really been critical to all of these all of these agreements, and we are very grateful for his work. So now that we have the global agreement in place and the national commitments in place, we need to start really, when people talk about implementation, what does it mean? It means the policies, it means the laws, it means the regulations to actually create the change. So I'll just give you two recent examples of how we've worked in the World Bank operations to use these legal processes to move forward. In Morocco, through what we call a development policy loan, a quick dispersing loan, we have put together energy efficiency regulation in the building sector, a regulatory framework for the integrated coastal zone management that spells out how to avoid the conflicts for coastal resources from fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, construction, et cetera, ports, Navy, and then we have fishing regulations to prevent illegal fishing. In Uruguay, through our low carbon growth study, we helped the government develop the laws for preserving soils and waters that require farmers with more than 100 hectares of cultivated land to create soil management plans for climate mitigation. So these are just a couple examples. We could go on for different countries, different sectors, but the idea is when people say it's time for implementation, they mean we need the laws, we need the policies, we need the regulations to make it happen. And the legal community is the key to all of that. And the third thing I want to mention, which has been talked a lot about financing, and I couldn't agree more with Akeem and the president about the importance of the overall banking sector and getting the regulations in place to get the financial sector to make this flow. The World Bank is also doing a lot to try to crowd in private sector to add to the amount of funding available. But we know that these NDCs that countries have made as part of their Paris commitment are not, the sum total of all those commitments aren't enough to meet the goals, aren't enough to meet 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. And we know within those commitments, many of them require financing. So the question is, how do we come up with that kind of money? And the private sector is one key way, and so the World Bank has been using a number of its instruments, particularly its guarantees, to try to help bring in others who can provide financing if it's more assured. But we've also tried to use concessional financing, which has been very important, even if it's small amounts, because it can be used, for instance, for first loss, some of the guarantees. It can also be that little topping up lubrication for the global public goods part of the development finance. I know a lot of you are here today, part of the climate investment funds discussion that we're having, and the climate investment funds and that process has been absolutely critical to helping us get where we've gotten today, and this kind of funding is going to be important going forward. So while we work on the banking, while we work on these new instruments, we also need to be sure that the world lives up to its commitment to making this kind of concessional financing available to our clients to help them meet their own goals and make Paris a reality. Thank you.